You're not alone. If you need someone to talk to today, please contact Crisis Services Canada by either calling them at 1-833-456-4566 all hours of the day, or you can text them at 45645 at 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern Time. Remember, you're not alone, and Crisis Services Canada is here to help. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of, let's get the banner up here, The Prospect Show on ASTV Productions. I'm your host, Graeme Forsyth. Happy to be back for another Monday here on the network. This edition of The Prospect Show is brought to you by Caisse Financial Group, Pilot-Mound Hockey-Academy, and TOVI Hockey. The 2022 Western Canada Hockey Exposure Camp is getting closer and closer. Of course, the camp will start on May 6th and go up until May 8th in Calgary, Alberta. All the games can be seen on our website at amateursports.tv. That's the only place you'll be able to watch it. But that being said, we'll continue our coverage here as this tournament continues to creep up on us. And Shawn Mullin is the former WHL and BCHL broadcaster, most notably for the Swift Current Broncos in the WHL. Also the voice of the Swift Current Wildcats here on the network from the Saskatchewan Female U18 AAA Hockey League. He's going to be coming on the show tonight to talk about some of the notable players he's seen on the list that will be participating in this camp, as well as talking about, what the scouts may look for in a camp like this, the pressure the players will face, and what the importance truly is of having a camp like this for all the players involved. Hopefully you guys enjoyed tonight's edition of the Prospect Show. So with that out of the way, let's run the intro. Tonight's edition of the Prospect Show here on ASTV.
Wow!
There's Shawn Mullin here on this edition of the Prospect Show. Shawn, great to have you on. It's great to get to talk to you on tonight's edition of the Prospect Show. How are you doing on this Monday night?
I'm doing well. Apparently, I've got a buddy who doesn't want to be apart from me for 10 minutes here. But yeah, no, it's good. It's we finally have a little bit of sunshine and warm weather coming to the prairies after what's been an ugly start to the spring. So that's nice. And at the same time, it's still playoff hockey weather, and it's exciting to get prepared to go and get to call some action at this prospect event and see a bunch of young, hungry players try to.
Yeah, no doubt. And yeah, we've gotten a bit too much snow this year. I know here in Manitoba, we got some more snow yesterday, but hoping that, the snow is going to melt soon. We'll get outside and enjoy that nice weather here in the prairies. And like you said, playoff hockey coming up very soon. And this camp here, the Western Canada Hockey Exposure Camp, there's over 300 players that are going to be participating in this camp. You've had a chance to take a look at the list. What are some players you're keeping an eye on heading into this year's camp?
I'll be honest with you. I mean, for me, I go into an event like this fairly eyes wide open, just kind of letting the players themselves make an impression. I mean, I've seen a few. I haven't seen a lot of 18 and under or 16 and under games this year at the male level anyway. I've seen a reasonable amount of the 15 and under games. Like I see a name like Gage Nagel, and I remember watching him. Now, he initially played his hockey in Swift Current, so that's a name that would stand out, and cousin of a former Bronco, Tanner Nagel. And I saw him at a tournament in Calgary, right? So you see some of those names, and you double check your list when you're doing an event like this because you recognize them. But what I like about going into events like this is to try not to, you go to a tournament with teams that are established and they're set up for the exposure. You know who the top guys are. They're on the top line. They're on the top power play. So you're narrowed in on them already. You look at their stats. You know who's the leaders on a particular team. What I like about these kinds of events is they're not really structured that way. It's not as much about, who wins and loses each game. You're not a team that's been well established and practiced together. So each individual player has a chance to define themselves and show what they're capable of outside of, the role that they've been placed into. And so we might have our impressions going into the event, which 5 guys or which 10 guys are the ones that are most likely to make some noise. But for me, it's less about that and more about who can separate themselves that you might not have wondered about going into the tournament. Who can show that they're capable of more than the role they've played so far? Who's able to establish their identity in a short period of time? So those are things that I look for, less than narrowing in on an individual player or two.
Right, makes sense. And like you said, I brought this up with Matt Gorman when I had him on the show here a couple weeks ago. It feels like a tournament like this, less about the wins and losses, more so about how the individual player is looking and bringing up the scouts. Scouts are going to be in the house for this exposure camp coming up. Obviously, there's the stats out there, but how important it is to see those little things that you don't exactly get to see on the stat sheet come out for these scouts to look at from these players.
Absolutely. And, again, when you're a part of a team, a coach has seen what they think of you. They've placed you in a role and they've asked you to play that role. And you can get a certain impression of a player from that. When they're brought into an event like this, it's up to them to define themselves. And so that leads to a couple of questions. Are they the kind of player that they that they were meant to be in that role they were playing? Is there more to them than that? And 2, do they know who they are? Because there are some players that come to events like this and try to be a player they're not. Everybody wants to be Ovechkin or McDavid or Crosby and be the team leader and score 50 goals. But not all of us are capable of doing that. And so do the players understand how they have to play in order to have success, even outside of the environment of their club team and a coach that's been following them? Can they come into an environment like this and jump into a role that suits them and play the kind of hockey they have to play to have success? You mentioned saying it's more about the individual than the team. It is, in a sense, that your team's success doesn't have the same feel behind it. It's not a group you've been with for 6-10 months, but the success you can have as a part of a group is what shows you as an individual. If you go out there and you try to do everything yourself and you can't work your teammates in, and you can't find a way to work together with players that you haven't played with before, but you're trying to, show your fancy dangles and your team gets blown up 8-1, that's not going to show well for any scout. So you want to have team success, but mainly you want to show the kind of player you can be in that environment and how you can help a team.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. Right. Obviously, that individual success of helping the teammates that they're situated with in this tournament will potentially lead to that team success for sure. You spoke about how it's going to be important for players to come in and understand their role, right? Obviously, a lot of pressure in a camp like this with a lot of scouts. A lot of players may be new to an experience like this. How big of a factor does that come into play? Just knowing that, hey, if I play my game, I'll be all right, instead of just being pressured into trying to do something maybe these players aren't too comfortable with.
Well, it's a catch-22, right? Because if you just kind of do what everyone else is doing, then how do you stand out in a tournament of 300 players? But if you try to do too much, then you're going to stand out in a negative way. So you have to know yourself. What am I good at? What are the things that I can do that if I execute are going to draw the eyes of the scouts? Because they're not necessarily narrowed in on 1 or 2 players when they come to something like this. They're, letting them open their eyes. And if you can, you're not going to necessarily get drafted or get a roster spot based on 1 or 2 games. But what you might do is cause a team to follow you a lot more closely than they would have before, or change a perspective on you. A lot of these players, the scouts already have a little bit of a book on them, but what can you do to change their perspective? What can you do to show that maybe your ceiling's a little bit higher than they thought it was? So it's a catch-22. I think you really have to do something to catch their attention, but do something that's within the limits of your ability. Right. Don't try to do something you're not, but make a difference. Absolutely. Do something to draw an eye to you. But that doesn't mean it's an eye-popping deke or a between-the-legs move. It could be, you just hustled that much harder than anyone else on the ice. You played more physically than anyone. You battled harder in front of the net. You showed the passion in this game like it was a playoff game, while some others were trying to put up points and be fancy. Something that inspires in a scout that this is someone I need on my roster or that I need to follow because they can make a difference on my team. Not, I can't wait to watch highlights of this guy, but I want him in my dressing room.
Right. No doubt. And there's going to be a lot of players from many different age groups participating in this exposure camp. 2003 born players all the way up until 2007 born creates, it's the old cliche, unique environment, with all these different age groups of these players coming together.
Well, I look at him. I watched the SSAC Lions and the KC Squires at a recent tournament and saw those teams struggle and looked at their records. And I know they had some struggles in the regular season in the Alberta League at their age group. And if you're a player that's been on a team that's struggling, sometimes that just kind of causes the whole group to play in a different way or, limits the impression you can make because of if your team's lost a game 7-1 that day, it's hard to be the player that the scout is narrowing in on. Here's a chance to start completely fresh. You're going onto a fresh sheet of ice with fresh teammates in a fresh environment and just show who you are outside the confines of, oh yeah, he's on that losing team, right? Or if you're on a winning team, but you're a player that's on the fourth line or the third pair and you don't get any of the attention because there's some big stars that are on that team, maybe you're not drawing the attention, but here's an opportunity with a brand new environment and brand new teammates to show what you're capable of, as long as you understand what it is that you do well and what you should do to highlight your skill sets.
Obviously, the older players coming in, there's players that have had experience of playing in this camp before. You'd think that they are going to have an advantage over some of the younger players and the players that haven't had that experience. Just talk about how huge that is, about the advantage of not only the older players coming to play here, but also just the experiences that they've had before to help themselves this time around in this 2022 Western Canada Hockey Exposure Camp.
I think there has to be some desperation too, though, if you're one of those older players. Is there an advantage to having been through this process before? Sure. But you're not coming back here to this event if you have the spot locked up that you want to be in. If you're a 2003 born player playing, in the top 6 of a Western Hockey League team or a junior A team or whatever the case may be, you're probably not at an exposure camp like this. So if you're coming in, you're an older player, and you're coming to an event like this, you believe that you have more to offer in a bigger role and a different kind of opportunity than you've had before. So those players have a different goal in mind. If you're a 2007, there's still a ton of rope ahead. There's a ton of opportunity ahead. If you're a 2003, 2004, you're starting to look at it and say, okay, my chances to make that leap are dwindling compared to where they were when I was the age of the younger guys. Right. So they have the experience edge, yes, but they also have to come out here and really show these scouts that have seen them 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20 times. Here's something different about me you didn't realize. Here's some improvements I've made to my game. Or, here's an element of what I can do that I haven't been able to show yet or that someone else hasn't seen yet. That gets somebody to change their mind about that player. Because most of the scouts will probably have their mind not maybe made up, but, have a book on those older guys already. And so how do they break through? They've got to do something unique. They've got to really leave it on the ice, leave it all on the ice that weekend.
Yeah, it is a very good point you bring up about how those older players, this is their last kick at the can for this camp to try to show themselves. For these scouts, like you said, they're playing in WHL, the junior A teams, they probably wouldn't be playing in this tournament, this camp. But before I let you go here, Shawn, you mentioned a few players you said that you recognized on the list. Like you said, you haven't had a chance to watch much of these players, but can you give us a bit of insight in terms of some of the players you may recognize if you can?
Well, like I said, I mean, I've seen these players from some of the under 15 teams at 2 different tournaments or 1 tournament at most. I see a guy like Dowhaniak. I watched him play before. I've seen Nagel play before. I've seen, on the Squires, Blake Cameron I saw play before. On the Lions, Rudy White. I've seen them. It doesn't necessarily mean that those are the players that I'm going to have my eye on. As a broadcaster, my job is to call the game as a whole. And one of the advantages of having ASTV there, a company like ours that will call these games and showcase them, is that if you make a difference in a game and you can do something that catches my eye or the eye of one of our other broadcasters, and we highlight that, there'll be scouts that can't make it to the tournament, whether it's college scouts or, team scouts that can't make it to the tournament, that will be able to watch it online and get an extra look at you. So if you can do something that draws our attention, then that helps you draw attention elsewhere too. But again, for me, it's, I can say I've seen this player or that player and they've got some good skill. The thing that excites me about this event is really not that. It's not like, here are these 5 or 6 guys. Because as I said about the older players, if a player is someone that's already got their path, if they were a first-round draft pick, if they were a second-round draft pick, if they have a roster spot guaranteed, if they're that kind of player, they're there already. If they're a guy that you're thinking, oh man, this guy could be in the mix for the NHL draft in a few years, they're probably not here, right? This is a camp for guys to stand out and show that maybe they've been overlooked to this point. And maybe some of the 15, the younger guys who haven't been through the draft yet, it would not be the case. But, for me, that's the thing, is who is going to separate themselves? Who's going to show the growth that they've made? Who's going to show the improvement? Who's going to show the skating improvements that they've made? Who's going to show the next level of their offensive skill that hasn't been on display yet? That's what I'm excited about. It's not the 5 or 6 players that I've seen before. It's because look at Owen Pickering as an example, a great example in Swift Current. He's at the World Under 18s right now, and he was a 10th round draft pick of the Broncos in his draft. Nobody knew who he was. Smaller guy at the time. Now he's like 6'3", and he's projected to be a late first or early second round NHL draft pick. Yeah. He's playing for Canada. That can happen. A guy who was, kind of a flyer that was taken in the draft, like, let's see what he'll be. Jake DeBrusk, and I'm citing examples that I know personally. Right. 7th round draft pick, was like 5'4" when the Broncos picked him. Ends up being a first round NHL draft pick. Coda Gordon, Colby Sissons, guys who were completely overlooked entirely and were list players. Justin Dowling has gone on to have an NHL career. So there could be a number of those guys at this camp that nobody was expecting to become that next guy. But the door is wide open. If you weren't in the top 100 of the draft list, if you weren't in the top 50, if you haven't signed already, if you're already 18 or 17 and you haven't had your break, everybody develops at different levels and at different times, and it's not like just a straight line. For some players, it's taken a little bit longer, then all of a sudden they just jump ahead and magic happens later in their career. So that's the storylines that I'm looking for, is who is going to emerge among the 300 players that are here. Who are going to be the players that make a name for themselves and start that step towards becoming one of those surprises.
Yeah, and it's going to be so exciting to see because, like you said, we could be looking at players that, could very well make a name for themselves somewhere down the line, like in the NHL, like you said, like you mentioned about those other guys. Shawn, I can't wait to be there with yourself at the tournament come May 6th, May 8th with ASTV Productions. Thanks so much for coming on the show and giving us your insight in terms of a tournament like, hockey exposure camp like this, and just the opportunity it's given to these players. Thanks for taking the time.
All right. Thank you, Graeme.
And that's Shawn Mullin on this edition of the show, the Prospect Show. And it was great to have Shawn on to talk about the camp today, the 2022 Western Canada Hockey Exposure Camp. Of course, myself, I'll be there along with a bunch of other people from our ASTV Productions crew come May 6th to May 8th. Tournament is the exposure camp right around the corner. Want to find out any info about the Western Canada Hockey Exposure Camp? Of course, we got it all covered here on ASTV Productions on our TV shows like The Prospect Show, Coffee with Graeme, which is one of my other shows, as well as Theo Tukuluk Show on the Ice. If you guys want to check out the Western Canada Hockey Exposure Camp website, be sure to check it out at Western Canada Hockey Exposure Camp.ca. We are going to send it to a commercial break now on this edition of the Prospect Show. It's going to be the first break in the show. And coming up after the commercial break, I'm going to be doing an edition of player breakdown. And who I'm going to be breaking down, the game of Cole Eiserman and why I believe the Shattuck-St. Mary's 18U forward superstar will be a top pick among some of the top picks in the 2024 NHL entry draft. That's coming up on this edition of the Prospect Show on ASTV Productions. Stick around for more after this commercial break with player breakdown.
Welcome to Pilot-Mound Hockey-Academy, your world-class academic and hockey training facility created to maximize each student's athletic and academic potential. Blackjack Stewart Arena, home of the Buffalo, is inside the 46,000 square foot complex, as well as a curling rink and other facilities. The students have a unique combination of successful, well-rounded education at Pilot-Mound Collegiate Institute and the professional hockey training in an encouraging community. The years of experience of on-ice coaching propel our students to the next level, both mentally and physically, in a professional environment.
Welcome back to the Prospect Show here on ASTV Productions. Shawn Mullin, former WHL Swift Current Broncos broadcaster, and BCHL broadcaster, voice of the Swift Current AAA Wildcats here on the network in the Saskatchewan Female U18 AAA Hockey League. Coming on the show tonight to talk about the 2022 Western Canada Hockey Exposure Camp, which will be held in Calgary, Alberta from May 6th to May 8th. Over 300 players will be participating in this year's Western Canada Hockey Exposure Camp. Of course, visit Western Canada Hockey Exposure Camp's website at westerncanadahockeyexposurecamp.ca. Was great to have Shawn on the show to get his expertise on his thoughts about this tournament, or this hockey exposure camp. I guess you could call it a tournament. even though it is classified as an exposure camp. But yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. May 6th to May 8th here on amateursports.tv, the only place you can watch it. Won't be able to watch it on Facebook or YouTube like our other broadcasts that we usually do. It will only be available. To watch here on amateursports.tv on our website. So yeah, choose us to watch this year's camp. But getting into this week's edition of Player Breakdown, did not do this last week, but happy to do it again this week. And today I'm going to be doing something a bit different, looking ahead to who I think will be one of the top picks in the 2024 NHL entry draft, and that is Cole Eiserman of the Shattuck-St. Mary's 18U team. He's number 19. He's a forward. He's from Newburyport, Massachusetts. He's a 2006 born prospect. He's already been set out to be a top prospect in the 2024 NHL entry draft. If you look on eliteprospects.com, it'll have that listed on his page. He's 6 feet tall, 181 pounds, according to eliteprospects.com. He shoots left, and man, in terms of his shot, phenomenal in the last 2 seasons. I mean, looking back to 2020, 2021, and 50 games played, en route to his team, the Shattuck-St. Mary's 14U team, winning the national championship over the BK Selects. Cole ended up scoring 5 goals in the biggest game of the year in the national championship to help propel Shattuck to that national championship. Looking into this year, I'm not too sure how this team did in terms of their national championship performance, but Cole was still very good. Third on his team in points. Huge decline in points this year in terms of the number wasn't the same. 86 points in 53 games, still over a goal per game with 56 goals, and of course still over a point per game by a mile with 86 points, but also 30 assists for this year's Shattuck-St. Mary's 18U team. Of course, third on the team in points. And just looking at it, he was playing against guys more so his own age. This was the season that Cole got a chance to play with guys that are older than him, and still showed very well. But what makes Cole so special? Well, I've mentioned his shot, but it's just his speed and his awareness on the ice as well that go hand in hand. And start off by showing a shot here. Got the share screen on here. We'll get this for you guys. So just in terms of his shot, by the way, unfortunately, I was not able to take stats from this year, but this is Cole's stats from not his stats, his game footage from last year. That I can find on YouTube on Wagon Hockey's website. Credit to them for this video. I'll link it down below in the description of this episode once this episode ends. But yeah, for Cole Eiserman, just this first set of clips here, it's just a shot, quick release, changes the angle, and you see it right here, the quick release, the change of the angle, drags it in, and that's such a nice looking shot, comes off the stick so nicely. And yeah, it's just his ability to pick his spot on net at a really high level, these goaltenders, and just the quick release, you'll see it here, right off his stick and into the net. And, this shot's only going to improve for Cole throughout the years. And I assume, even though he didn't have the same amount of goals this year, it might have looked a bit better just with him being a year older, being that much stronger this year. Talking about his speed, this is a skater that has great straight line speed, able to blow defenders away. With this speed, show you guys the clips right here. And it's just phenomenal. Cole here, it's just no one's catching him. All they can do is really fall down and try to stop him. As you can see there, the defender diving. And even then, Cole, just such a good job at protecting the puck from these players here and using his speed and being able to continue moving his feet, going through the traffic, going through the middle of the ice. Look at that, the puck protection, fending off players, able to puck protect, and a nice silky move there in front of the net. And just look at this, Cole just able to blow by the defender. And there's that elite shot again. And you'll see it here. Cole ends up chipping it, gets the step on the defenseman, and just a beautiful move, taking it to the backhand where he had space to do so and putting it in the net. For Cole Eiserman, I talked about his awareness. Just a guy that's so aware out there in terms of just knowing where to position himself on the ice, finding the quiet ice, the weak spots and the defensive coverages that teams show out there. So in terms of this awareness, you'll see here Cole, he's the one who's going to end up getting it. Keeps good support with his player, makes himself a good option, continues going towards the net in that open space because there's a lot of it here, but just Cole doing a really good job of recognizing that, gets it and puts it in the net on that shot. You'll see it from a different angle here. Great spacing by Cole and just great awareness to be in the spot he was in. Right here, Cole seeing the ice really well coming in, sees that this player right here that is uncovered in the middle part, the guy that it's hard to point out because I don't have arrows pointing towards the guy, but the guy Cole ends up passing to, just realizing the lapse in coverages, the big gaps in coverages from the defense. Shattuck coming down with such speed and the speedy entry by Cole Eiserman here. But watch what he does. Just that awareness to continue going to the net to find the open spot at the side of the net to make himself available. Doesn't stop moving his feet. I mean, he glides to the net, but doesn't stop moving his feet until he gets to that area, right? And then you'll see here, Cole ends up right beside the net, and you'll see he recognizes that he's playing it back. Going to recognize and know that if he stays right here, there's not really anyone covering him. He's got an easy tap in. So just having that awareness to be in the right places and to do things effectively like Cole Eiserman did has resulted in some really good things for himself. This is a very good player with a very good shot, very good speed, very good awareness, like I said. And he's a player that, is going to continue to get better. He's probably going to continue to, not sure if he'll grow anymore, but probably continue to put on size. And this is a player that's just going to continue to develop if he chooses to stay at Shattuck-St. Mary's, one of the best sports schools out there in terms of hockey for developing talent. You just look at the players they've sent to the NHL. For Cole Eiserman, playing in that environment with his awareness, his hockey IQ, he's only going to get smarter, only going to get better during his time with Shattuck. Even though he didn't put up the same amount of points this year as the season before, he was playing against older guys. Expect for Cole Eiserman to potentially have a crazy season next year in terms of could see him in triple digits potentially if he's used to the game. More used to that level of play in terms of the competition that he's playing against, in terms of how old those guys are. He'll be a year older next year, and it's going to be a huge year for him trying to show to scouts why he deserves to be near the top of the leaderboards in terms of players who could go very high up in the NHL entry draft. I'm going to call for this kid to be a first-round pick. And I think that potentially he has potential to be not only a top 10 pick, but a top 5 pick heading into that draft. But there are also a lot of players that I haven't seen. I mean, there's so many good prospects out there. And let me tell you, this 2006 draft class for just not draft class, but this 2006 born prospect pool has a lot of great talent. Not only Cole Eiserman, but a guy like Kristen Humphreys as well that I've talked about on the show. Macklin Celebrini, a teammate of Cole Eiserman's who I've also had on the show, as well as Berkeley Cadden. I mean, you look at a guy like Clark Caswell, Roger McQueen, Charlie Ellick, the list goes on and on. Jonas Wu. I mean, there's so many good players, so many good players out there, and I'm sure there's so many other good players that I haven't even heard of in this 2006 Born draft class. But yeah, Cole Eiserman, only going to get better. Great shot, great speed, and great awareness, and that's what makes him such a special player. And yeah, like I said many times, only going to get better as time goes along here. But we'll end off tonight's edition, this week's edition of the Prospect Show coming up. That'll do it for this week's edition of Player Breakdown. Leave a like if you enjoyed this edition of Player Breakdown, as well as leave a comment down below to give your thoughts on just what you saw from this footage that I showed today. So taking one last commercial break here on the Prospect Show coming up, I will be giving you guys some final words and signing off on this edition of the Prospect Show on ASTV Productions. Not the right clip. That is the intro of the show. We don't want to play that. Now, here's the true start of the commercial break, folks. Stick with us. Welcome back to this edition of the Prospect Show on ASTV Productions. Just got done doing this week's edition of Player Breakdown. Talking about Cole Eiserman, my thoughts on him. One of the highly touted prospects heading into next year's 2024 WHL. Or I guess in 2 years, sorry. In 2 years, yeah. Cole won't be eligible for 2 years. Yeah, 2024 is in 2 years because, yeah. So screwed that up. My apologies. But yeah, Cole looking to be going high in about 2 years. So that's going to give him even more time to develop, I guess. But yeah, this is, besides that, getting away from that now. This is the end of today's episode. This will mark the end of today's edition, or of tonight's edition of the Prospect Show, of this week's edition of the Prospect Show. I've been your host, Graeme Forsyth. Special thanks to Shawn Mullin for coming on tonight's edition of the Prospect Show and talking about the 2022 Western Canada Hockey Exposure Camp. Special thanks to you, the viewer, for tuning in to tonight's edition of the show and this week's edition of the Prospect Show. And also special thanks to our sponsors of the Prospect Show in Caisse Financial Group, Pilot-Mound Hockey-Academy, and TOVI Hockey for sponsoring another edition of this show, the Prospect Show, yet again. The Prospect Show, a new episode will be coming out next week at 8 p.m. Central Daylight Time on Monday night. You guys can catch that episode on our Facebook at ASTV Productions, on Twitter at Amateur Sports TV, or on our website at amateursports.tv. Be sure to stay tuned for the guest list that will be released coming up on Monday morning next week on Facebook and Twitter, as well as on Instagram at ASTV Productions. Just before 12 p.m. Central Daylight Time, it will be released on Instagram, Facebook, and on Twitter. And yeah, should be a lot of great content for you guys in next week's edition of the show. Going to continue talking about the 2022 Western Canada Hockey Exposure Camp. Planning to have some interviews for you guys from players that will be in the camp this year that will be performing in the camp. I got one lined up for sure, hoping to add some more in terms of the players that could be coming on the show that will be participating in the camp. So stay tuned for that. Also want to let you all know about my mental health fundraiser. It's almost May 10th. It's creeping up very fast here. So I think 2 weeks from now, or 2 weeks tomorrow, it'll be May 10th. 15 days to go on the fundraiser on GoFundMe.com. It's Graham's mental health fundraiser. All proceeds being donated going to the Canadian Mental Health Association. So it's going to a wonderful cause. Thanks to everyone who's donated so far. Of course, your support means so much. As well as just a special thanks to everyone who shared it. If you still want to share or donate to the GoFundMe page, it is going to be up until May 10th. That is when the fundraiser will close. So feel free to donate if you can. Like I said, going towards a great cause to support the Canadian Mental Health Association, donating money there. And if you don't want to donate, or if you choose, or if you feel like sharing instead of donating, that's okay too. Please share it with family and friends. Like I said, this is going towards a great cause. So yeah, any type of eyes on the fundraiser that way by sharing it will only help get the word out. But I will link it in the description of this episode, the link to Graham's mental health fundraiser that you can donate on GoFundMe shortly after this episode ends. So yeah, appreciate everyone who may chose to donate and may choose to share it. Yeah, what else? Nothing else to talk about here on tonight's edition of the show, except for I just got to leave you guys off with this. Until I see you all next Monday night, folks, at 8 p.m. Central Daylight Time for an all-new edition of the Prospect Show. Have yourself a wonderful rest of your Monday night. Have a wonderful rest of your week as well. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe out there. And until next week on Monday night, everybody, until I see you guys next, host of the Prospect Show, Graeme Forsyth here. I'm signing off, giving you the salute and the peace out on this Monday night. Take care, everybody. See you soon.